Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Good Bloke, Not Woke podcast. Today, I'm really excited to interview somebody who I think is just extraordinary. Francisco Valenzuela is from Canada, and he's sitting up there in Canada. It's about 11:30 at night right now. And Francesco and I connected on LinkedIn a few years ago now, and he's been a lifelong FIFO worker. And he's a really interesting guy because he's deeply passionate. He loves his work, but he's also been through the mill. You know, he's been through the boom and bust of that industry, and it's an industry that's got challenges right now. He's been through the ups and downs of high finances and then droughts, but he's also been through marriage and divorce and learned a lot of lessons from those sorts of things. And all the while, he's been one of these big-hearted characters who's always stretched himself to try to help others and make life better for those workers out there on the mine sites and where they're drilling actually for oil and gas, and just doing incredible work in incredibly remote regions. And I've always found him just a deeply passionate human being to talk about and a really fine man. So I thought it'd be just awesome to have him on the podcast and just have a conversation, see how he's going and see what's happening up there in Canada, our Commonwealth cousins. So, Francisco Valenzuela, welcome to the Good Bloke Not Woke podcast.
Well, good morning, John. Like you said, it's a good evening here. Yeah, thanks for the invite. Like you said, we connected on LinkedIn. I actually picked up your book. In it for the long haul, kind of shared that with folks up in my industry. I myself wish I would have read that when I first got into it, because I think like most of us that enter the fly in, fly out lifestyle, we're drawn to for starters, the huge opportunity that provides us so that we can provide for our families and the people and the communities we care about. Though we don't necessarily understand the hazards that come with remote work. And it's not so much the work itself that's hazardous in a way. It's actually how it impacts your personal life when you're home and also when you're away at work. And yeah, that's been the more challenging part, I guess I would say.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. So how many years have you been working? And you're working, is it oil or gas or both?
Up in northern Alberta in Canada, it's the oil sands. So basically it's a mine, we mine ore. It's black sand, and we run it through our process, get it to bitumen, and then we don't refine up here. We send that down the pipeline down into the States where it gets refined and then shipped back to us and all over the world. So, big 797 trucks, those 400-ton heavy haulers, electric shovels that dig up the mine, and then it's a big project. So I've been up there since May 16th, 2011, and then previous to that, I was at another site, which was away from home.
Yeah. So how old were you when you first got into the industry?
So the oil and gas industry, I started pipelining back in 1993, just out of high school and to pay for school. I went to school to become a paramedic, and then decided that wasn't for me, and then just went back to that. And just, I was one of the guys that had some first aid training, and they said you should be the safety guy. And I had no understanding of safety the way it really is. I just thought it was a glorified way of saying the Band-Aid on site. So I thought, well, I can do that. And then lo and behold, more schooling, a little bit more university training, and then ended up getting my designation in 2011. So here in Canada, it's the CRSP, and started working pipeline, then some heavy civil projects, and then up at for construction for the oil sands mine, and now in operations.
Wow, what a journey. Yeah. So tell me, in all of that, I mean, obviously a lot of challenges and a lot of growth and those sorts of things. at what point in that, so from 1993, at what point did you decide to settle down and get married?
Oh my goodness. I had my son in 2001, and his mother and I had been living together for several years. Then we ended up getting married in 2002. So got married, um, and then yeah, started pipelining. I was generally home every night, but they were long days, 6 days a week. Um, Sometimes some out of town work, and then eventually, kind of grew professionally in there. Started out as a guy just on the end of a shovel, uh, daylighting pipes or exposing underground pipes so we can dig the lines up, and then just worked my way further up north. So that was in southern Alberta. Now I'm in northern Alberta at a remote site that has two camps.
Yeah, gotcha. So when you go away, what sort of shifts are you on? How long are you away and how long are you home?
Okay, so we're on a 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off swing, I think is what you guys call them down there. Here we call them rotations. So that's been mine. Early in my career, I was a contractor before I became like an employee, and you work whenever you can. So I had as long as 30 days, and
Wow.
then home for five, and then you'd work as much as you can, right? So
Yeah.
because you don't know, as a contractor, they can let you go the next day or not. I've always been able to stay busy, and in a
Yeah.
way that was a little bit of a handicap because I always justified everything by saying, I have to make money now because there'll be a time when I won't be busy.
Yeah.
And I missed my kids growing up for the most part, so and that created a lot of challenges and heartache, to be honest.
Yeah.
I've got a great relationship with my kids now that they're older. I didn't have a bad relationship. I was just not present for them.
And I'm interested in that because it's not a rare story, like and part of the challenge, as you know, we're sort of exploring healthy masculinity here, and we have these we get a sense of something that we need to do or need to say or a decision we need to make, but then the justifications come over the top and our mind sort of overrides it, and then we go and do something else and we go against that. Do you have a sense of what sort of point you started to feel like you were on a trajectory that you were justifying because of perhaps very good reasons, but it was going against what you felt?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, there's a lot of things, right? So one of the things is, you have an opportunity, you make money like you've never made before, particularly as a contractor at first. I didn't have any, or our schooling system here doesn't really teach financial literacy
Hmm.
um, to young people. So you put, a young man into, we'll say in my 20s, I was in my 20s, all of a sudden making, you know, more money than I'd ever made before. For me, it was a big jump from like, I was making when my son was born, low low five figures, right? Like, 25,000 Canadian a year. And then as it goes up and up into six figures, you don't have the discipline nor the knowledge to be a good steward of your money. You're like, oh, okay, well, we need a trailer. We need a bigger house. Oh, we need new vehicles, right? No water here, so I didn't have need for a boat. Thank goodness. But then, oh, that's my 50-inch TV isn't big enough. I need a 55-inch or a 60-inch TV.
Yeah.
All these things, and you get into a really bad habits. Retail therapy. You're gone. You have a lot of guilt because you're gone. And I honestly rationalized it that I'm gone these days, and in these days I made X amount of dollars. Therefore, I come home. I should spend that much money on my kids and my wife,
Yeah.
on gifts and things like that. And that's how I rationalize it. And I remember having a discussion with my son when he was 16, and we started 16, 17, and I started talking about this. And he said, Dad, I didn't want things, I just wanted your time. And that broke my heart at that moment
Yeah.
because I realized how much time I had missed.
Yeah. And at the time, do you think that you had a sense of that anyway, or was it sort of or a little bit sort of lost from your awareness, I suppose, because you had attention on
Well, it
things?
was it was actually honestly lost from my awareness a little bit. Like I said, ego kind of plays into it. You're doing a really good job. You're getting validation at work. You're not really getting as much at home because everybody's missing you. You come home, you're Disney dad, and then your wife or partner gets a little bit upset because they're stuck disciplining when you're not there, right? And then they kind of become the bad person. And then so I kind of was like, okay, you don't want to have to discipline, I'll discipline. And then, you know, my nickname became the meaner because I was meaner than mom. Because when I ground them, they'd stay grounded usually till I left. And oftentimes the infraction wasn't so big that it needed grounding, but I had to, felt that I needed to come down with the heavy foot. So it was, yeah, so it was tough. It was, there's no instructions, on how to parent, and then there's even less on how to parent when you're working away, right?
Mate, I mean, absolutely. I mean, as you know, I'm a parent, and I was sort of making it up as I go along, and trying to not do some of the things I didn't like from my parents, then trying to do the things I did like from my parents, and I think also at that age, I was 30 when I became a dad. You sort of feel a little bit full of yourself, and you know what you're doing, and you got all the answers, whereas
Yeah.
you actually don't. You're stepping into a minefield and you're tiptoeing around mines. But I think that, perhaps there's that other thing I'm sort of perceiving with you being away so much and then coming back. It's like when you spend money on your kids and they get excited, that's a sort of an approval signal as well, where it's perhaps, whilst it's approval, it's not the approval you really need. Yeah.
Yeah, so for sure. And I'll say this is as I was building my career, and I'll be honest, my first marriage failed because I was more married to my career,
Hmm.
because I had that mindset of I'll have time later. And I've come to the realization now is we never have time. We only make time for what's important.
Yeah.
And I realized that late on, like in one of my talks that I've done in Houston. I did a talk with a gentleman from NIOSH for the CDC at a conference, and I remember my first foray into big oil up north, and I actually was really proud. I'm like, holy cow, I'm finally working for one of the oil majors, and I said, I'm finally big oil. And this old grizzled veteran looks at me and goes, "Kid, you ain't big oil yet." And I was a little, well, what do you mean? And he said, "You ain't big oil till you've had a divorce or two under your belt." And I'm like, I wasn't divorced at that time. And I was like, well, and then I came to understand there's almost, I don't know if it's that expectation, but it's worn like a badge of honor that you've sacrificed absolutely everything for your career, your industry, right? And it's a very kind of hyper masculine thing to do. And then, yeah, and then I had another fellow that I know, and he left the industry, and he says it pays well, but it costs more. And he never ever had him and his partner never had kids. So it's interesting. I'm lucky that I have the career that I have now. I've got a great employer. I'm treated well. I wish, I think it was Rod Stewart's song. I wish I knew then what I know now when I was younger, or something like that. I forget how
Yeah.
the line in that song goes, but yeah, well, hindsight's always 2020.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because when we look back and we think, why didn't somebody grab me and tell me this stuff, But then the other question we have to ask ourselves is, well, would I have listened? You
Well,
know?
and that's exactly it. And I think many of us in this industry struggle with the exact, and that's kind of how my website kind of started. It started as a couple posts on LinkedIn, and then somebody said, not everybody's on LinkedIn. You should do a Facebook group. And then people said, well, you should do a website, because what I was kind of saying was landing for a lot of folks. And I was very open about a lot of my challenges, my struggles. Divorce, marriage, hurting, financial stress, burden, having to essentially provide for two families, which is hard. It puts a lot of pressure on you, and you don't get to do the things that I guess help feed your soul. That can happen. and then I'll say you grow old. Maybe not grow old. You grow weary quicker.
Yeah. Carrying a lot of burden. Hey.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting, that one, isn't it? It's like I don't know, life can sometimes become like a bit of a. I remember once somebody described humanity as a busload of people charging downhill on a windy road down a very steep hill with a 4-year-old at the wheel and no brakes. You know? And and life can get a little bit like that because as you know, I've done a lot of work, and I mentioned in the book a few times the work I did in the Avatar courses and learning how to live your life in a very deliberate way. And deliberate means making very clear decisions and very clear agreements and taking yourself out of the space where you're reacting to life. And
Mhm.
wondering if you sort of, with all of your experience, how much of that time, especially in the early days, you were sort of reacting to life as opposed to creating your own deliberate path through life.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I don't think I didn't plan any of it. I was that cork bobbing down the stream, right? I made the most out of the opportunity I was given. I was like essentially born in Argentina, immigrated to Canada, lived in northern Alberta for a bit, then southern Alberta. Grew up wanting to be a marine biologist and study whales, and there's no ocean near me. So, but there's a lot of oil, so kind of fell into the oil and gas sector because, well, there was work and there was opportunity, and made the most of those. And from, I guess, the trappings of, oh, I have a good job, steady work, all those things, huge success. But on, I'll say, the personal side of things, of marriage, divorce, and the strain that creates, I wouldn't ever say failure, although it felt like failure. And that's
Mhm.
where, I'll be honest, there's a lot of depression and lots of thoughts of suicide and even attempts.
Yeah,
Um, where where and you see that in our industry, it's quite prevalent. The United States has a national violent death reporting system, and mining, quarrying, oil and gas extraction are high, like over 70 per 100,000, right? And the national rates in the 30s, right? So it's over double,
yeah,
right?
well,
Here in Canada, our population, our demographics a little bit different, but our national suicide rate is 9.2. So if you look at those numbers, and there's a lot of pressure. Like, the work has pressure, there's demands, there's, you have to perform, you have to produce in a timely manner, in it's, at times it can be a pressure cooker. Other times it's the best place in the world to be. You've got, like you say, your mates. You have a great time. It becomes your surrogate family when you're up there, and you take as much care of each other as you can. I think in the last 5 years, I've seen a big shift where, we've got over 90% men at our site, so it's predominantly male dominated. Starting to open up, share kind of what's going on. We've been very deliberate in messaging of, it's okay not to be okay.
yeah,
Like I mentioned earlier, in our conversation before we came online, you know, during COVID, brought it up to the company. We should bring up a psychologist or a registered social worker to provide support, not just for the worker, but I call it wraparound care, so that we could bring in the people's natural support networks, which are their families,
yeah,
right? Just the ability to do that, even if the family just calls in remotely. Put together a proposal for that using actually a study out of Australia from, actually this one right here, from the impact of fly in, fly out work arrangements on the mental health and well being of FIFO workers on the University of Western Australia. You guys actually have really been a lot of help to me moving
yeah,
the needle up here
yeah.
in Canada. So really appreciate the hard work that's done down under.
Yeah. Well, I think, the FIFO industry, the whole mining industry's made Western Australia very wealthy. And a lot of that wealth is flowed in a lot of good areas, including into universities where there's been a lot of study done. So I'm really happy to hear that it's been useful for you guys up there. And, that's a great initiative to bring in a psychologist, social worker to create more support, because I imagine those people can be a little bit more proactive in stepping into any particular man's universe to sort of really get him to open up and share what's going on. I'm just interested, and tell me to get lost if you like, but I'm really interested in that whole mindset. When you started to get into that place where you got depressed and you started to get into those negative areas where you're having thoughts that are not really helpful. Can you get a sense of how that came about? Like if you went back upstream a little bit and followed the steps downstream, how did you get to that place?
Well, it was real quick. One, and it's one of those things, right? Head knowledge does not equal heart knowledge. And I even think of the saying is like, here, take my advice. I'm obviously not using it. I'm a big proponent for people asking for help,
Yeah,
but I myself struggle asking for help. So what happened is, from my previous marriage, half my income would go to them, and hey, 17 years together, I'm cool with that. My last marriage only lasted 2 years. When our rotations became longer or swings became longer because of COVID, just a big disconnect
yeah,
occurred. I was gone longer, 16 days gone, and then at home just couldn't really reconnect. All the things that I would do to kind of bring me back into the family, the activities weren't for me anymore. So then it was like almost like I was like a ghost in
yeah,
the home, right? So it didn't feel like home. I was like, oh, but I was paying for everything to support it. And then I was like feeling a lot of ingratitude and just very alone in that space. And then I remember uh, my ex said, well, I don't think this is working. And I'm like, fine. And we agreed I wouldn't touch any of the property. We'd sell a property we'd purchased in the mountains, which was going to end up being our forever home. And then we'd sell that and split that, and then she had children from a previous marriage, and their father actually died by suicide. um, so very, very tragic. They were very young kids, and everything. And then so that was the agreement. And then she was moving, sold the house, needed me to sign off here what's called dower rights on the property so the house could be sold. And I'm like, okay. And then I was waiting and this is the part, right? So on one of my podcasts, I do a podcast with a lawyer, because divorce is for many is a path that we take in this industry. And the challenge for me is I trusted too much, because I signed off all my leverage. And then so the agreement, our verbal email agreement she'd sent to me was like, oh yeah, don't touch the properties. I won't go after you for any spousal or child support. And then as soon as I'd signed off on the dower agreement, I got a letter from her lawyer and wanted the other half of my income. So for me, the choice was, oh my goodness, I don't have enough to live now. Like
mm,
I don't even have enough for a week's worth of groceries, um, with what was being asked. And I remember, the place I was renting is like a block and a half away from a bridge crossing a river. And I took one of my climbing ropes. I do some climbing, and then tied part of the rope to the bridge, the other part, one end of the rope to the bridge, the other end to me. And I was getting ready to end it, but then had a voice come talk to me and say, this, I can't do that to my kids, and to just battle through it. There's no going around it. There's no going over it. You can only go through it. And then I guess that's that part where I think I had to really dig deep. And yeah, then came back, and yeah, and I guess that was probably the darkest moment for me. And
wow.
yeah.
Well, I'm glad you made that decision, because you're a good guy and you've got an enormous amount to offer, and it's shocking when any life ends prematurely. And so how did you get through that then? Obviously, if you've having all your money taken away from you and struggling to survive. How did you
Well,
reconcile that?
I just went and talked to my lawyer, and he said, well, we might win, but you're going to spend 80,000 on me. What can you afford to give up right now? And then, so it was a matter of choosing what I can afford to lose on the front end,
Mm-hmm.
right away, to essentially make the problem go away instead
Yeah.
of dragging it up. Because what could have happened and what was going to happen was you can also apply apparently for interim child support, and I would have been paying close to 3,000 a month for that, um, and that was still not affordable to me. Paying,
Mm.
another, yeah,
So it's
the
interesting,
other.
right? If you roll all the way back, and I just find this all, it's just really interesting how we as human beings, how our minds work, and the dark corners our minds lead us into, and we think it's a good idea. If you roll right back to early on in that relationship, was there any sort of indicators that you might have had that you sort of steamrolled over, where you just thought, oh, this is something here that needs to be addressed, but you don't address it?
Yeah, I think some of the parts is that I overlooked was just some early messages early on where I think, um, from a masculine, I'll say, I'm Hispanic by culture, right? From Argentina, from South America, and things like that. So I think there's some cultural aspects of myself that, as men, we're meant to protect, provide, all those things. But then I started realizing, it was like, well, wait a minute, I'm providing everything and not receiving much. Like I remember one instant, I went and picked up a birthday present for her daughter, and it was a pair of jeans and a sweater. It came to $120. And then I went back home and said, hey, I picked it up. And then so she could wrap it. And then that was it. And then I remember my daughter, she went and picked up a book, and it was like $23. And she said, oh, can you e-transfer me the $23 for the book? And the book was her idea. And then I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. So I did that. And then even though it bothered me, and I never spoke up. So I think those are those little things that, hindsight again being 2020, I probably should have left.
It's so
But again, I kind of tend to be a man who sticks to his vows. So that was a hard one. Even if I think back, it'd be hard because I've always imagined, well,
yeah,
it's not just the good times you stick together. It's actually the tough times you're supposed to really stick together.
yeah, so interesting. It's like in my first marriage, we bought a house, and before we sat down and bought the house, we worked out our finances, etc. And then once we moved into the house, my wife said to me, I don't think I'm going to continue. I think I'm going to stop working. And I said, why? And she said, because I find it really stressful. And I immediately went, oh, okay, well, I'll take care of everything then. What a
Well, there's
horrendous
an element of
that was.
pride in that too, right? Where you feel you're doing a good job.
Well, yeah, but also, being a bit macho and being solving all the problems. But in actual fact, that was the beginning of her downfall as a human being. She slid right down into deep mental health issues and obsessive compulsive disorder. And today she's a shell of a human being who's got two grandsons that she never sees because she can't get out of her own way. And it's so heartbreaking. But before we bought that house, we'd made an agreement. And what she was doing was breaking the agreement. And I allowed her to break the agreement. So I also broke the agreement. And the
Yeah.
consequences of that were devastating. And I'm wondering also in that situation with you, and there'll be other men tuning into this podcast who come into these situations. It's like, where do you see the value of creating really clear agreements in a relationship and then having the courage to speak up when those agreements are not being honored, you know?
Yeah, like I had a similar agreement. Again, my agreement was I was only home essentially for in the beginning 10 days at a time. So I worked in the beginning before COVID, it was 10 days on, 10 days off, right?
Yeah.
And that was actually kind of the sweet spot for me because, we actually thrived under that because, the stuff that I would do to come home to would be, hey, my jobs, my blue jobs is what we called them and what she called them. They were still there for me.
Yeah.
And then you could wait. But at 16 days, then her son would pick up those blue jobs, or she'd get a friend to take care of them for her. And then, and then that was a little bit bothersome to me. But I didn't have much of a choice. But yeah, our agreement was, I paid like a flat rate of, for instance, 2,500 a month, which was my contribution to the home. And then, all of a sudden, oh, my credit card, or Costco, which is like a grocery chain, um, I had that. So, oh, just made a second card for the groceries, and then the groceries were adding up to 2,000 a month. So all of a sudden, it's 4,500 a month, and I allowed that part, and I didn't say anything. But to be honest, I felt I was doing. Oh, if I'm only supposed to give this much and I give that much more, I'm doing much better, right? I'm contributing more, and that's noble and honorable. And so in a way, I broke the agreement. Had I just said, "Oh, okay, well," and just let her get her own, that would have been a lot better for me.
But it's so interesting, isn't it? Because it's like that act of not speaking up. At some level, we're condoning it, yeah. And
Yeah,
and so then, and this goes both ways. It's not it's any sort of relationship, whether it be a man and a woman, or a relationship between two people in business together, or even between two friends. There's we need to have clarity, so that we can understand the playing field, so that we can do our bit. And when we're guessing, or we're not sure, then we're leaving ourselves open to us or the other person misinterpreting, which can then go down a very slippery slide really quickly, like 2,500 a month to 4,500 a month. That's a very steep slope.
oh yeah. Like it's I I had a newer truck. I sold it so I could help out more, and bought myself like just a beater. We call it a beater, is just a bucket of bolts, really, because I just needed to get me from the house to the airport. And yeah, and then I can contribute more that way, right? I was thinking, you know, uh, yeah. So, anyways, and I was, I'm, like I said, I'm your typical Latino, I think, romantic at heart, and fall deeply in love. So,
Yeah.
eh,
And sort of I
I
mean, I
have to own
think
that. I have to
we
own
can
that.
we can end up being a bit of a martyr, you know.
Oh yeah.
And of course, you probably grew up a Catholic, didn't you? And I did too. And martyrs are celebrated. There's something really cool about being a martyr.
Well, I read a book once, and it said, every man dreams of being the hero in his partner's and their wife's life. And I guess maybe I potentially bought too much into that. I wanted to be a good stepdad. Like I taught her son tennis, mountain biking, rock climbing, all those kind of things, right? So poured into her family, because what I learned in my first relationship was not to be absent. And I
Yeah.
tried very much not to be absent. Then my career had already been established, so I didn't have to work so hard at climbing, and I
Mhm.
could say no, and I didn't need the next promotion, nor
Yeah.
was I looking for it. I was happy where I was at, comfortable with the pay. I didn't need 30% more responsibility for 3% more pay. Just the math didn't add up to me. And nor did the extra time commitment. So I was like, no, I'm not going to sacrifice family for career again. And that was a promise I made to myself.
Yeah.
But you you have to water the garden of every relationship, and that's kind of the way uh, I guess the ethos for me is that. But it's not just one way. It
Yeah.
can't be one way.
No, absolutely. I'm a big fan. I've learned over time that clear agreements And, when agreements can't be met, renegotiating agreements is just so crucial. And sometimes it's really uncomfortable, but boy, there's relief on the other side of it when you do get that real clarity. So, mate, now in recent years, you've got your FIFO for real. Tell me about that and the work that you're obviously doing to support other people, other workers, and you've really stepped up. And I know that you've been invited to speak at some really cool places to tell your story and talk about what you're doing. I'd love to hear all about it.
So yeah, like I said earlier, it started out with a couple posts on LinkedIn that resonated for some people, and I had people reach out to me and tell them that they needed to hear that, and then they said they know people too that need to hear it, and they said, well, not everybody's on LinkedIn. My generation, right? I'm going to be 50 this year, and they said just start a Facebook group. So I started a Facebook group, and then people said, well, and even my kids said only boomers use Facebook, and then so my son, and then so I said you should do a website. So then I'm like, okay, and my second wife, she helped out with the website and stuff like that, and that was kind of a project that we kind of started a little bit together. She kind of put it together because I have no idea how to do that. I just provided a lot of content in a way, just sharing my story. And then, and then that started. And then more people said, hey, we need, this is good. I did a podcast, or essentially it was just a glorified Zoom meeting, to be honest, with a sleep expert, a psychologist, did the one with a lawyer. And then I have a couple others that are people just sharing their stories, right? And then just some resources and some blogs that really landed for some folks, and it was recognized a little bit by some other companies, and even my company. I'm like, oh, you're doing this, right? Because it's not part of my regular work, right? And I call it my pain to purpose. I think a lot of the most meaningful work that people find and do in their lives is born out of pain in a way, and wanting, to help others. And that's where I didn't want other kids to go through what my kids went through, having their dad, present but not be there, right? Have to be either just the Disney dad or just be the meaner, as they called me for a while, and that was hard on the spirit. And then not get stuck in the golden handcuffs, right? So I like in your book, you talk about like you got to make a financial plan, right? Talk to an expert, and go from there, right? So those are important lessons that we going into this industry we don't prepare people for. Like, it's funny, we do like a job safety analysis for shoveling snow, right? Shoveling snow, we as Canadians do that at home all the time, right? We can do it in our sleep almost, but something that is life changing, both in a good way, but can also have, some consequences, or will have, no matter what, there's consequences, but how you manage them. And there is a conversation that has to happen between partners. How much are you going to communicate while you're away?
Yeah.
What times, what are things that you can do to still feel, to stay connected, right? Oh, do I get a good morning text? Do I get a good night text, right? Like, I would have loved to receive those, right? As a reminder that I was on their thoughts, not just, hey, did you send the e-transfer? And then, anyways, the nice thing is, before that used to make me cry. Now I'm far enough away from it that I can now laugh at the absurdity of it. But we all grow, and hopefully we learn. But so I guess it all started from that, sharing my story, finding out that, hey, I wasn't the only one with that story. There were like hundreds of dudes or mates at my site that had very similar stories, and some that were even more heartbreaking. And I realized, you go to my website, it says, you're not alone on this journey, right? The journey together, right? And it's about that, and finding, like-minded people that are trying to create an environment where those living FIFO can thrive. There's a lady out of Australia, Jeanette Bean. and she does stuff for women and the wives or partners at home, because her husband, and he's gone, can be months at a time
Yeah.
with his work. So it's one of those things, and it's encouraging, that there's other folks like that are doing stuff to help families stay connected, stay together, versus the alternative, because we all can fall into maladaptive behaviors, drug and alcohol abuse, retail therapy, right? Porn addiction. There's tons of jokes about, you know, at camp, never go up to camp with a black light type of deal, right? It's, it's yeah, it's awful to think about it, but the jokes and things like that.
Yeah. Well, I think, and the other one, of course, is gambling too, with especially.
Gambling, yeah, huge.
Mm. What a trap that one is. And but it's so interesting, isn't it, mate? Because when I was writing the book, and when I was, even before I wrote the book and I was contemplating the whole topic, I thought about it, that if you look at Australia and Canada, such vast countries, such incredible landscapes that are, so much of it is quite inhospitable. But for decades and decades and decades, men left their homes a week or two after Christmas and came back a week or two before Christmas. Some of them were working on road construction projects, rail projects, telegraph, shearers. They had to just go away to get work, and they weren't being paid penalty rates, and they didn't have amazing food, like they were eating bully beef or whatever. And that was just what the family had to do to survive. And of course, they didn't have Zoom or anything like that. They couldn't even ring home and talk to the family. They were just gone, and
Yeah.
and it wasn't ideal, but it was accepted as, well, that's our life, that's our lot. But then it seemed that at some point, perhaps back in the 90s, people started to talk about FIFO like it was some new phenomena. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, it never has been new. The only difference is it's fly in, fly out. Whereas back in those days, it was hitchhike in and hitchhike out.
Yeah.
Then,
Drive in, drive out, right? If you
yeah,
had a car.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And most of them didn't. They couldn't afford a car. So, they're very, very hardy people. But I think one of the challenges in a modern society, we're looking for everything to be comfortable and just how we want it. And, we shy away from anything that's a little bit difficult. And of
Yeah.
course,
Next day
something,
delivery.
yeah. And like when something becomes difficult and then we resist the difficulty, then it's worse. And we end up going down a very black hole on that one, as opposed to embracing difficulty and using that as an opportunity to grow and evolve. So where do you think this is all headed? I mean, obviously, you being in the oil and gas industry and the current, significant push for carbon, reduced carbon emissions, and fossil fuels being very much on the nose in some parts of the world. And I've got to say, I don't agree with any of that. I don't think we have a carbon problem at all. But where do you see it all heading?
Well, one, I don't see our dependence on hydrocarbons, on on oil and gas going. We live in Canada and we get really cold winters, so we do need oil and gas to heat our homes, to keep us alive. Also, all the petrochemicals in the medical industry, well, in everyday life, right? You need it for
Yeah,
this, right? You need it for your sunglasses, like everything. It's around us everywhere. We are taking um, that very serious. Like we recycle a lot of our processed water, so then we're not drawing more water. There's a company like the company I work for. They're very proactive with that. So yeah, just even anything new in terms of carbon capture. We're actually we're actually going to have some electric vehicles at site now. We're testing those out to see how they handle our winters, just the light duty pickups type of thing.
yeah,
So then that way we can see, if there's a benefit not just from a carbon footprint, but even a cost perspective. So we're evaluating everything to try and do better. And unfortunately, I don't think that's recognized as much as it should.
Yeah.
I even look at how we're treating, like now we've got, put together a proposal to bring massage therapy up to site for our workforce. So that way after work, right, it'll keep them out of going to the health center for the aches and pains that all a medical center can do is give them a Tylenol
Yeah.
and ice and stuff like that just to make camp life better, right? Like we've got a wonderful gym. During COVID, we couldn't use the gyms, and that was the challenge with, and I'm sure it was the same in Australia, is, you know, couldn't be within 6 feet of each other. You know, you'd go pick up, get wait in a line, space 6 feet apart or 2 meters apart, and grab your bag of food, go eat it in your room by yourself. You couldn't leave your room. You couldn't go outside. You know, you were honestly very isolated, and that was where I saw a lot of challenges and people's spirits, the morale, everything go down. Heavy-handed messages. If you don't have your mask on, you know, you lose your job. If you don't follow the rules, you know, there was so much fear, and I was really disappointed with our whole global response
Mhm.
uh, to COVID.
Well, it's interesting. I don't know whether you've seen the hearings in the US Congress now, where they've been really grilling them, and Fauci has admitted that the social distancing, that was all just made up on the spot. There was no evidence to support it. The lockdowns, that was all made up on the spot. There was no evidence to support it, and even the wearing of masks. But then how profoundly it was enforced at such cost, and it's like, do we want to send somebody in a deep depression to stop them catching the flu? I mean, that was really what was happening. And I wonder, a lot of the business leaders who made that decision, I wonder if that haunts them. And, it might be really cool to support them to speak up and talk about it so they can clear their conscience. Because, I mean, some of them, it must be really, really killing them, to know that they did that to people, and what the cost of that really was. And because I imagine some of those people working on those mines, they would have sunk down into very dark places, and that would have affected their marriages as well. The ripple
Oh,
effect, I think, would have been extraordinary. And I'm wondering what industries are doing now to make sure that never happens again.
yeah. Well, I think a lot more of that is kind of groundswell of. I think you'll just see more resistance from the general population, a lot of
Mm.
distrust, right?
Yeah,
It's like, well, like I'm not doing that, and
yeah,
unless I have to, right? Like, so for instance, at work we all had to get, because we were flying to work, and there was a federal mandate that if you got on a plane, you had to be vaccinated, right?
yeah.
So then everybody got vaccinated, or else you'd lose your job. So that was a decision that was hard to make for folks. It's hard to make for me. I was like, I'm generally a very healthy individual, and no core comorbidities that help push people to the bad side of COVID. But I'm not a doctor or anything like that. But
Well,
you
mate, you
know,
are nearly 50.
I know, right? I'm like, yeah, as my son says, I'm half a hundo, and then. Uh,
Well, and one other quick question I've got on that. I mean, the truckers convoy over there, I mean, they were global heroes, those guys. Like, really, and not just guys, there was women, everybody. And what a stand they took. I mean, how did you guys feel about that? And did you hear much about it? Or
Well,
was
the leader of that actually is from the town where I live, Medicine Hat, so from here. And yeah, and a lot of it was actually very strange to see the level of persecution for people that supported it. As you can have any kind of protest and get people gather with and without masks during COVID. But if you were the truckers convoy and, one of the barbers here, he went out there and he was cutting truckers' haircuts in Ottawa. So he drove out there, but to have bank accounts frozen, and that'll impact people's credit scores down the road. Like I, personally, I thought that was definitely, very heavy-handed, draconian, basically, and that's not the Canada that I felt I knew and that my family came to in the mid '70s. So it was very strange
Yeah,
for me to see that.
I wonder what would happen if Javier Milei came to Canada right now. I mean, what he's
Well,
doing in Argentina.
I think our barber guy would go and offer him a haircut, for starters. But
Well,
yeah, yeah,
I heard him on an interview. He said he never ever combs his hair.
yeah, yeah. Was Boris Johnson? There's something about crazy hair with some high-ranking politicians, I guess.
Yeah.
But who am
Well,
I to talk, right? They've got this peak here. It's like,
mate, I have no comment. Oh, look, mate, look, it's been so good to have this conversation and, just explore these viewpoints. And thank you for your courage because you went some really cool places there, and hopefully that's going to help some people who are tuning in.
yeah.
At the end,
I was going to say, one of the things I hope to see is, so like we have an OH&S legislation here, for instance, with over like X amount of workers this far away from a community and services, you need to have this many nurses or this many first aiders, this kind of first aid kit, like our schedules, right? We're supposed to have a nurse. I would like legislation to look at mental health because that's a huge growing. It's growing in terms of a lot of the disability, short-term disability, long-term disabilities that workers are taking is in the mental health space. I would like to see legislation say, hey, you know what? You've got over 200 workers at a remote site that's over 100 hours or 100 kilometer or an hour or 100 kilometers away from, comparable services, should have an on-site mental health professional because, Zoom, you can do that, but oftentimes it's not as effective as face-to-face, and even the counselor we have at site says, it's very different having the lived experience, the lived camp experience, and particularly with our close-knit communities, remote workers, we create our own families there, and that helps. Yeah, that helps buy credibility for the counselor to do their job and help people. So, for instance, at our site, like I said earlier, close to 600 visits, sessions done, and over 200 people have reached out that have never reached out for any kind of mental health service before in their life.
well,
Right. Some of that is the fact as our men, right, is it's real hard when you're home to disappear for 1 to 2 hours and not want to tell your partner where you've gone, to appear weak, right? And that's the problem, is the stigma is asking for help makes you weak.
yeah, I
So
get it. Well, it's so interesting, isn't it? Because I think that also helps to develop a stronger moral compass because there'll be a man there or a woman who's on site has that feeling that maybe they need help and they need to talk about it. But then if there's fear there and their mind overrides it and starts talking themselves out of it, well, then they're breaching their own moral code, following what they feel. So making it a little bit easier for them to make those decisions and step into that vulnerability of sitting with someone and opening up your heart and sharing what's happening for you. I mean, the ripple effect of that, of giving somebody the space to actually make those tough personal decisions,
yeah.
it's extraordinary what it can do to help that individual develop as a competent, self-managed human being.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Like, you look at the end, at the start of every year, the gym memberships and everything go right up. Everybody hires a personal trainer. And if you say to somebody, hey, I got a personal trainer, I'm going to whip myself into shape, everybody gives you a big pat on the back, right on, right? But if you say, you know what, I'm seeing a counselor, a therapist, there's that stigma of like, ooh, and we got to get away from that because who better to help us? Like, I would hire a personal trainer because I know nothing about lifting weights.
Yeah.
So I want to learn how to do it properly, how to do it effectively, become better at it, right? And then that way there'll come a time I won't need the therapist or the personal trainer, right? I'll become competent. And I guess that's that part that, I hope to get to with on-site care and the employee assistance plans, or EAPs. They're great. They're fantastic. The problem is with a lot of the folks that I've talked to is when they get to the point when they're calling them, they're actually treating them like a crisis line, which they are not, and they're not designed that way, because you'll get on the phone and then it'll be like, okay, somebody will call you in 2 to 3 business days. And at that moment, they need to talk to somebody right now. And it's
Yeah.
just that part. So that's the challenge with EAPs and versus having somebody on site that can be there.
We'll have to do the work to expand the Male Hug to Canada. So the Male Hug is an incredible organization here, founded by Tony Rabba. And you can hear Tony's podcast interview. I think he was my second podcast. Brilliant, big Lebanese Australian man with a huge heart. And he developed the Male Hug because he wanted men to be able to get support really quickly. So basically, it's got this thing called a buddy line where you ring up and you get another bloke on the other end of the phone you can just have a chat to. He's not a therapist, he's not a doctor or any of those things. He's just somebody who's going to listen and have a chat to you. And it's such a cool service, and it's growing and evolving. And yeah, we hope to get it into North America before too long, because I think it's just a beautiful flavor. It's so non-offensive and not confronting. And just because sometimes blokes are sitting in things that they need to talk about, but they're not ready to talk to their mates about it yet.
Yeah.
That's a big issue. Well, mate, quick question for you. I always, finish the podcast off with this question. When you were growing up and you're developing, who was a man or a woman or a person that you sort of looked up to, who you felt like had this incredible moral code? They were very trustworthy, that you sort of maybe even wanted to model yourself on, or you felt you could depend on? Who did you come across?
Oh my goodness. I admired my parents' work ethic, though I didn't never want to be my parents. Coming to Canada with nothing. Again, we came to Canada during they were Chilean and stuff like that. So we fled Chile and Argentina to Canada. And then just, Canada was a country accepted us, allowed us to build a life and a family. We became Canadians. We were able to keep some of our customs and traditions, but they were ours. And we practiced them in the home, right? Like I speak Spanish, but still feel very, very, I'm more Canadian, and then South American. So my parents annoy their work ethic. I had an incredible grade 1 teacher that he showed me a great deal of kindness and believed in me. So I guess it's the folks that kind of believe in you. And then I don't have one person really. It's just a whole bunch of people. They have different traits that I admired the traits. Honor, kind of somebody being noble. I don't know. And then here's me thinking of Don Quixote a little bit, a story I read when I was younger, right? Chivalry and chivalry in the absence of all else, and even when it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Wow. Pretty cool. Well, mate, thank you so much. I look forward, as you may know now, I'm spending a lot of time in the US. So hopefully I can get an opportunity to catch up with you in person.
That'd be great.
Canada and see you, and or when we're both in the US at the same time, and be good to sit down and drink a few coffees and just talk about life, and maybe even get to meet your kids.
Yeah, that'd be great. All right.
Awesome, mate. Well, everybody out there, thank you for tuning in. And don't forget, please, when you're out there in life, be the adult that you needed when you were a little kid and you're in trouble or you're in distress. That's all we can ever do to give the best of ourselves to the world. So thanks, Francisco. Thanks, everybody. And we'll see you all soon.
Take care.